What if Europe's next weapon against Russia isn't a missile, but a bridge? What if tunnels, oil tankers, and narrow seas quietly decide the future of a war? Right now, beneath the calm waters of the Baltic Sea, a silent power struggle is unfolding. Finland is planning a massive bridge to Sweden. Europe is talking about seizing the Russian shadow fleet. NATO is flooding the same sea with warships and submarines, and Moscow knows exactly why. This isn't about infrastructure. It isn't just about trade. It's about cutting lifelines, economic, military, and strategic, without firing a single shot. The Baltic Sea is no longer just water. It's pressure, it's leverage, and it may decide how long Russia can keep fighting. So how did bridges and tankers become weapons? And why does the Baltic Sea suddenly matter more than ever? Europe is thinking big, really big. And it's not just about convenience or faster travel. Finland has revived a decades-old dream. The Kvarken Bridge, a proposed 30-mile-long connection across the Gulf of Bothnia, linking Vasa in Finland to Umeå in Sweden. If built, it would become Europe's longest bridge, stretching across islands and open sea, a massive engineering feat. But why now? Why suddenly push for a bridge that was first suggested in the 1970s? The answer is simple: security. After joining NATO in April 2023, Finland suddenly found itself on the front line of Europe's northern defences. Russian aggression in the Baltic has highlighted a stark vulnerability. If Moscow decided to blockade the sea, Finland could be cut off entirely. Currently, crossing between Finland and Sweden relies on ferries that take 4 hours or more, or long detours by road. That's not just inconvenient, it's a strategic risk. The Finnish Transport Infrastructure Agency said, "It's an extremely large infrastructure project. Such long fixed connections across the open sea are hardly found anywhere in the world." The bridge would not just be a road. Plans suggest 3 bridge sections, linked by islands in the Bothnian Bay, with raised sections to allow ships to pass underneath safely. Protection for the bridge's supports would also prevent collisions with vessels, combining engineering with strategic resilience. And Finland isn't stopping at bridges. Officials are exploring megatunnels under the Baltic, including a nearly 60-mile-long undersea railway tunnel connecting Helsinki to Tallinn in Estonia. This tunnel, almost double the length of the Channel Tunnel, would feature 2 tubes, one for passengers, one for freight, offering an alternative lifeline to Europe if surface routes are compromised. Lulu Ranne, Finland's Minister of Transport and Communications, cautioned, "The idea is unrealistic unless the EU would provide more funding, but feasibility studies are already underway, backed by the EU and Finnish governments. These projects are about more than engineering. They are about redundancy and security, ensuring Finland and Sweden can maintain connections to Europe even if tensions escalate." There's also a broader European vision. Another proposal envisions a bridge or tunnel linking Helsinki to Stockholm via Turku and the Åland archipelago. This route could ultimately connect to Denmark through the Øresund Bridge and from there to Germany, creating an unbroken transportation network across northern Europe. Jiri Häkämies, CEO of the Confederation of Finnish Industries, explained the logic. "Our country's Western integration also concerns transport. We need stronger transport connections to the rest of Europe and the world so that the economy can grow and foreign trade can thrive." The key takeaway? Europe is turning infrastructure into strategy. Bridges and tunnels are no longer just civil engineering marvels. They are tools to safeguard economies, maintain NATO supply lines, and deter Russian aggression. Finland and Sweden are planning decades ahead, with leaders openly stating that continuous infrastructure projects may stretch into the 2040s and 2050s. Russia's economy is heavily dependent on exports through the Baltic Sea, particularly from St. Petersburg and surrounding ports. Nearly half of Russia's crude oil exports flow through this waterway, making it a critical artery for funding Moscow's war in Ukraine. By constructing the Kvarken Bridge, the undersea tunnel to Estonia, and other infrastructure projects, Europe can reduce Russia's ability to dominate maritime transport. These routes ensure that Finland, Sweden, and other northern European nations can trade and move resources freely, even in the event of a Russian blockade. This strategy is about more than commerce. It's economic containment. Russia can no longer rely on predictable routes for trade, and its northern ports, once lifelines, are increasingly vulnerable to European control and sanctions enforcement. The combination of new transport links and naval oversight threatens to isolate St. Petersburg, striking directly at the city's economy, which is heavily dependent on maritime exports and energy revenues. Economic pressure on Russia extends beyond infrastructure. Europe has set its sights on the Shadow Fleet, a collection of aging, often unregistered oil tankers that transport Russian crude around the Baltic and evade sanctions. Isaac Levi, Russia-Europe lead at the Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air, explains why this is critical. Without attacking the Shadow Fleet, Western allies enable Russia's main source of income, which generates an incredibly high and rising military spending for the war in Ukraine. Since 2023, these Shadow Fleet vessels have carried over 80% of Russian crude oil exports, using obscure insurers and foreign flags to bypass G7 and EU restrictions. The Baltic Sea, therefore, has become a chessboard of economic warfare, where intercepting or sanctioning a single tanker can directly reduce Moscow's revenue. The EU is exploring several measures to target these ships: seizing vessels under environmental or piracy laws, requiring credible insurance for tankers operating in European waters, blacklisting additional Shadow Fleet ships, building on UK precedent. Estonia's Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna highlighted the urgency. Close to 50% of sanctioned trade in Russian seaborne oil is going through the Gulf of Finland. There are the environmental threats. There are the attacks we've had against our undersea infrastructure. Now the question is, what can we do with these ships? Christian Buger, a maritime security professor at the University of Copenhagen, warns, "What is happening right now is escalation. We're just going to see more attacks on critical infrastructure, both at sea as well as on land. Every seizure, delay or sanction against the Shadow Fleet raises the operational cost for Moscow, directly impacting its ability to fund the war in Ukraine. Europe has discovered that economic warfare on the water can be just as effective as boots on the ground." To fully understand Europe's strategy, we need to recognise why the Baltic Sea is vital to Russia. The sea serves as Moscow's economic lifeline, funneling crucial exports like oil, gas and goods that sustain the Kremlin's economy and military. Ports like St. Petersburg, Ust-Luga and Primorsk handle nearly 50% of Russia's crude oil exports, funding operations in Ukraine and other regions. It also houses critical infrastructure, undersea power cables, fibre optic internet lines and shipping lanes, all of which are necessary for communications and logistics. Any disruption can cascade through both the economy and military operations, creating vulnerabilities Europe is ready to exploit. Estonia's Tsahkna reiterated the stakes. Close to 50% of sanctioned trade in Russian seaborne oil is going through the Gulf of Finland. There are the environmental threats. There are the attacks we've had against our undersea infrastructure. Now the question is, what can we do with these ships? Russia's naval presence is also constrained. As of December 2023, Moscow deployed 1 attack submarine, 5 guided missile destroyers, one guided missile frigate, and 35 smaller ships in the Baltic. Even with rotation, NATO's growing fleet dominates strategic areas. The Baltic Sea is, for Russia, a vital artery for survival, and losing control here could mean crippled exports, restricted naval mobility, and a weakened economy. Europe has recognised that sanctions alone are insufficient. The EU is now targeting Russia's financial lifelines directly by controlling shipping lanes, seizing shadow fleet vessels, and enforcing price caps. Left-wing MEPs in November 2025 stressed, "One of the most important ways to support Ukraine is to stop all revenues that finance Russia's illegal war. To do this, the EU must move from words to action and stop the Russian shadow fleet transporting oil on rusty ships via the Baltic Sea." Measures include banning the sale of Western tankers to buyers outside the G7 oil price cap coalition, blacklisting additional shadow fleet vessels, pressuring oil brokers and refineries to avoid Russian products, coordinating monitoring through the European Maritime Safety Agency. Even partial enforcement has real impact, slowing cargo, detaining ships, and increasing operational costs directly hurt Moscow's revenue and, by extension, its military spending. Finland's seizure of the Eagle-S tanker in December 2024 exemplifies this strategy. While legal challenges emerged, the operation sent a clear message. Europe is ready to enforce sanctions physically, not just on paper. Parallel to EU economic measures, NATO is building a strategic presence in the Baltic Sea. Countries like Denmark, Lithuania, Poland, Estonia, and Sweden are expanding their navies, purchasing attack boats, frigates, submarines, and surface combatants. Sweden's 2023 entry into NATO was pivotal. Its small, quiet submarines and surface vessels are perfectly suited to the Baltic's shallow waters, narrow inlets, and dense archipelagos. Paul Jonsson, Sweden's defence minister, explained, "Sweden's small and quiet submarines are perfect for a sea with smaller inlets, small islands, small shallow waters. A lot of things are being done to protect critical infrastructure on the seabed." Brian Clark, naval operations expert, noted, "The vessels, combined with Sweden's submarines, would be very useful for closing off the Baltic Sea if they wanted to, using the combination of the submarines and those surface combatants." NATO's Baltic Sentry operations add further oversight, patrolling the sea and ensuring that Russian movements are closely monitored. This strategy secures trade routes, protects undersea infrastructure, and reinforces deterrence, sending a clear message to Moscow that the sea is no longer a free highway. The Baltic Sea is now a geopolitical chessboard, with stakes that extend far beyond regional trade. For Russia, it's a lifeline, enabling exports, funding military operations, and sustaining critical infrastructure. For NATO, it's a strategic corridor, allowing the alliance to control the flow of goods, monitor Russian activity, and enforce sanctions. Stephen Horrell, former US naval intelligence officer, explained NATO's advantage. "Sweden's small and quiet submarines are perfect for a sea with smaller inlets, small islands, small shallow waters. Control of the Baltic is also about economic warfare. By monitoring the shadow fleet, enforcing sanctions, and maintaining naval dominance, Europe can directly cut into Moscow's war revenues, while safeguarding its own infrastructure and trade routes." The Baltic Sea is no longer just water. It's Europe's economic and strategic front line. Bridges, tunnels, and naval patrols aren't just infrastructure or military assets. They're tools to control trade, disrupt Russia's shadow fleet, and secure the future of the region. For Russia, the stakes are clear. Fewer routes, higher costs, and mounting pressure on its war economy. For NATO and Europe, it's about deterrence, security, and strategic influence. The next decade will show who truly controls this vital corridor, and the outcome will shape Europe's security, Russia's military reach, and the future of Ukraine.